This is Amy Villaroya, representing Week 9, a collective bargaining group for the course N5340, Nursing Management Seminar and Practice through the University of Texas Arlington College of Nursing. I am here with Harjit Randhawa, Dignity Health Service Area Director for Employee and Labor Relations, who kindly took time from his busy schedule to help us understand better about collective bargaining process. Again, Harjit, thank you for accepting as our expert. I do have few questions and clarifications from our group.
Absolutely. It's an honor to be here, Amy, so fire away. Be happy to answer any questions you have.
Can you just please brief us, tell us about your role and which labor agencies do you deal the most?
My role is as the Service Area Director for Employee and Labor Relations for Dignity Health. In that role, I cover a service area of 4 hospitals. The 3 hospitals here in Bakersfield, Memorial, Mercy Downtown, and Mercy Southwest. In addition to that, I also oversee the Northridge Hospital and Medical Center. So those are the 4 hospitals that I'm responsible for as it relates to employee and labor relations. And the second part of your question was, which agencies do I deal with primarily?
Correct.
You know, as far as agencies, basically my role, the major agency obviously is the NLRB, which is the National Labor Relations Board, which oversees and manages the National Labor Relations Act as it relates to unions and unionizing and labor relations. There are additional state agencies, state versions of it that I also work with, hopefully try to avoid for the most part. And I also interact with the 3 labor unions that represent our members, which is the California Nurses Association, the SEIU, which is the Service Employees International Union. And in addition to that, I also work with the RN 1-to-1 SEIU union, which represents our nurses at Northridge Hospital.
Did you work in a non-union hospital? And do you have any preference? Which one?
I actually have worked in non-unionized environments as well as unionized environments. There's pros and cons to both. My personal preference is to work in a non-unionized environment. It just allows for employees to speak for themselves individually. There's more opportunities for merit increases. All of that goes away in a unionized environments where everything is governed by the collective bargaining agreement.
Is it mandatory to be a union member? If so, is there a repercussion not to join the union?
California is not a right-to-work state. If you were in a right-to-work state, you do not have to join the union, even though the union represents the majority of our employees, but you're not obligated to join. California is not a right-to-work state, which means that if the employees have voted to be represented by a union, you do have to join and pay dues, or you have to pay a service fee, which is the same thing because it's usually the equal equivalent. If you do not join within the first 90 days, because you have up to 90 days, the first 90 days is the introductory period for our members, that the union can request that this employee be terminated for failure to join the union. And we, under our collective bargaining agreement, we would have to obligate and terminate the employee.
Ooh. Who is the most important group represented at the bargaining table? Or are all seen as equal importance?
That's a very interesting question. Unions would always like to think and state that all members are represented equally. But the reality is, it is a few minority voices that seem to raise issues and concerns which may or may not be representative of the entire membership. And those are the ones that get most of the attention. So it's not equally represented, no.
And the following question is almost similar, and you touched us. What are the advantages or benefits for joining collective bargaining unit? And is the employee union a burden to the organization?
The advantages to collective bargaining is that we have a governing document. There is no independent decision made for merit increases, where, high-performing employees would get a higher rate of increase as opposed to low-performing employees who would get a lower score or no increases at all. So in a collective bargaining agreement, all of that is an equal playing field. So everybody gets the same rate of increase, whether that's 1% or 2%, whatever is outlined in our collective bargaining agreement. So it has a tendency to equal the playing field as far as performance goes. High level performance, there's no additional incentive for them to work any harder because the rate of increase they'll get is the same as the low performing employee.
And are they a burden to the organization?
Are unions important
Unions?
to they certainly do not add, from my perspective, as a agent of the employer, I personally do not believe that they add any value to the organization, as much as they'd like to think that workplace safety or patient safety is important. But what they say, the employers, that's their paramount number one objective, is patient safety. Make sure our patients are taken care of, they are taken care of safely, they get healthy, they are treated, and they go home. The union doesn't have to tell us, right, that we don't already know. That's part of our strategic plan and our mission as a faith-based organization, that taking care of our patients safely is our number one objective. So do the unions add anything to that? No.
During the process of collective bargaining negotiation, how do you determine when you have reached an impasse on a particular condition?
An impasse is always reached when neither party is willing to compromise from a position that they may have taken. As an example, could be rate of increases that a union may, their final offer may be 5% a year per, for the next 3 years over the life of the agreement. An employer, based on their finances and their financial analysis, can only offer 2%, and that's their last and best offer, and they cannot go above that. And so we're 2 percentage points apart, and unless one party is willing to compromise, you reached an impasse. And you can do informational picketing, you can continue to talk, but an impasse is reached because neither party is willing to. And sometimes you have to bring in a mediator and go to mediation or arbitration as part of the negotiation, labor bargaining. Because if you cannot agree, then we'll maybe take it to a third party and let them decide for us.
What's the duration?
Well, there is no duration. The law says that we have to bargain in good faith. But good faith is never really defined in the law. Good faith, most employers interpret that we're willing to meet as often as you like. We're willing to discuss. But, this is our last and best offer. And so I've had contract bargaining that have taken as little as 2 or 3 weeks to bargaining that have taken years. And we've never actually had a collective bargaining agreement. We've continued to talk, we've continued to negotiate, but yet the members were never represented because they never had a formalized collective bargaining agreement.
How do you decide which areas you are able to concede to get more of an area that is seen as more important?
Well, it's based on our strategic plan. For example, we know that benefits are escalating and rising at a rate higher than the inflation rate. And we all know that we need to control benefit costs. So if the union is willing to work with us to reduce costs by higher premiums, co-pays, narrow networks, however we can reduce cost, we may be, as an employer, hypothetically willing to offer a slightly higher rate of increase, merit increases on an annualized basis. For example, if the previous contracts at 2% a year, we may be willing to go to 2.5%, even 3%, knowing that what we've saved in benefits costs, we may be able to translate and pay into salaries.
Can you make changes on the benefits in the middle of a contract?
Typically no, unless there's an opener or a clause written into the agreement that if a rate of increase in our benefits hit a certain escalator, they're basically called openers. That if these triggers happen, then we are willing to come back and renegotiate that part of it. But typically, once a contract is ratified and signed by the union and the employer, we're obligated and bound by the terms of the agreement. And you usually do not want to go back and renegotiate.
Are these something that are discussed prior to the collective bargaining process or negotiation?
Oh, clearly, when we know that collective bargaining is coming up and the contract is going to expire on an X or Y date, we clearly start our process maybe as early as 6 months to a year before the actual bargaining negotiations start. So we know, as an example, what our benefit costs may be. So we can budget those out, and we know what we need to get from the unions. We know what the rate of inflation is, so we know how much we may be able to give in increases. We know how much our reimbursements are going to be from the federal government, from the different payers that we may have. So we have a pretty good idea of what we're willing to concede and what we need for the union to concede on to create a win-win contract. A contract that's fair for everybody, the employees as well as the employer.
In the collective bargaining negotiation process, have you ever felt that you left something on the table in the final agreement?
Of course, there's always, in hindsight, hindsight's always 20/20, that through casual conversations that you discover that we gave up too much in wage increases, in benefits, or work rules, or management rights, that you never get 100% of what you want. And I'm sure, I can't speak for the union, but I'm pretty certain that the union would tell you that they don't always get 100% of what they want. That's why they call it bargaining. You have to bargain for it, so you have to give up something to get something.
In the collective bargaining negotiation process, have you ever felt that you left something on the table in the final agreement?
Oh, absolutely. In any agreement, you always feel like you either gave a little too much or that you should have negotiated harder and gotten a better deal from the union. It's bargaining. You know, you give something and you get something in return. And we never get 100% of what our wish list is, just like the union never gets 100% of what they want. And that's why they call it bargaining. You have to bargain for it, so you negotiate. But you always leave something on the table.
Do you believe the union truly represents the employee's benefit?
Their mission statement would say that. They originally, when they started, unions always were there for a reason, because employers were never fair to their employees. But in the last 130 years of collective bargaining and unionization in the United States, that is not true anymore. That it is a business. A union is a business at the end of the day. They will tell you that they're there to protect the employees, work rules, safety rules, which is not, in my opinion, it's not true. Having worked in both non-union and unionized environments, as much as the unions like to spew their propaganda that they're focused on employee safety, that if it wasn't for them, the employer would take advantage of them. In the competitive environment, especially in healthcare that we live in, that is not a true statement. That the reality is unions are a business. They're $1 billion business. And they want as many members as possible to pay the 1.5% of their annual salaries in union dues. And when you add that up, it's big business. So to answer your question, no.
What are the most common complaints about the union that you have encountered?
Common complaints from
The union, about the union.
that the most common complaint is the interpretation of the collective bargaining agreement. That they seem to interpret what is a clearly written article, and they interpret it obviously to their benefit, when clearly the contract or the article may say something different. And they grieve a lot of these issues based on their interpretation. And many of these go to mediation and arbitration as a result of their belief in what the article says or what's written in the contract. And that seems to be a common reason why we have so many employee grievances.
How about the employees? What are the most common complaints?
The most common complaint from employees is that their managers are not treating them fairly, that they need the unions to protect them, to take care of them. Now, do we have, isolated managers that may not treat their employees fairly? Perhaps. That's clearly not the majority of our managers. They're good, hardworking individuals that just want to do right by their patients and want to take care of their patients. And sometimes holding an employee accountable, what I may or the manager may think is an accountability issue, the employee may think that they're being singled out for unfair treatment.
Can you comment on this statement, my job is protected by the union, so it does not matter what I do?
That is clearly an incorrect statement. That no collective bargaining agreement, no contract protects an employee from compliance with our policies, whether that's attendance, performance, patient safety, behaviors in the workplace. Now, clearly, if you have a collective bargaining agreement, we have to follow the rules. We have to follow our progressive discipline policy. That ultimately an employee will lose their job for violations of company policies, for violations of state laws. Clearly, fighting, as an example, is not going to be tolerated. You will lose your job over it. Now, can the employee grieve that termination? Absolutely. Per the collective bargaining agreement, they can go through our grievance process and even mediation and termination. But at the end of the day, it is an employee's right that we have the right to terminate employees. As long as we follow our progressive discipline policy, we can terminate them. So to your statement that is that job protected no matter what they do is an absolute incorrect statement.
Is there any difference, like the union for like the police, teachers, when it comes to their job, for the protection of their job?
Well, public sector unions are slightly different. There's a lot of regulations on the books that want to make sure that the employee has been given every right that is afforded him or her. So the termination process is a lot longer if you're a public employee, whether you're a police officer or whether you're a teacher. But even then, for example, we may go through a progressive discipline that may last a few months, from a verbal statement to final write-up. If you're a teacher, because of the grievances, it may take a year or longer. And they're still entitled to pull that teacher out of the classroom. They're still entitled to pull that police officer from the workforce, but they may still have to pay them while they're going through the mediation grievance process. So, but that is only in the public sector. Private sector, obviously, even for unions, works a little bit differently.
Thank you. When can a union call for a strike or informational meeting?
Okay, as to your question about
Or
strikes.
picketing?
Okay,
Yeah.
as far as a strike, that we clearly have in our collective bargaining agreement a no strike clause, so they cannot strike. Now, to answer your question about picketing, informational picketing, a union is part of collective bargaining as far as, when we're negotiating for a contract. And as you mentioned earlier, if we're at an impasse, they have absolutely right to do informational picketing, as long as they give us notice. They have to give us a minimum of 10 days notice on the dates and times that they want to picket or to do informational picketing. There are strict guidelines on how they can do picketing. They have to be on the sidewalk. They cannot disrupt an employer's place of business. So in other words, they can clearly stand outside an employer's business at the gate, but they clearly have to be on a public sidewalk. And they have every right to, communicate their message to whoever chooses to listen, whether that's the person driving by, somebody wants to stop by, and in that case, ideally, they would like to have the media interview them so their message can get out to a wider audience.
How often does a labor representative come to the facility, and who do they report to?
A union representative, they have a right to come as often as they choose to. Typically, they're here a couple of times a week because just like I have 4 hospitals that I oversee, they also have multiple employers and labor contracts. So they're typically here a couple of times a week. They clearly have to announce when they plan to be at our property and who they plan to go see. They cannot disrupt our workplace. They cannot walk into a department and interrupt while the employee is working. They can clearly meet with their members on the employees' break time and lunch breaks.
Do you have any message for new nursing leaders, on what they can prepare to best respond when there is an employee grievance?
Do your homework. That learn what the policy is, understand what the policy is, and if you feel like that it doesn't apply to you or the employer applied it unfairly, you have every right to grieve. Reality is that some employees don't want to take responsibility for their behaviors, whether that's attendance or workplace performance or attitudes. And it's a result of that they choose to grieve it. But if they understood it, accountability, I think I mentioned it earlier, goes a long ways towards having a mutually beneficial relationship between the employer and the employee. But we're in healthcare. Nurses are extremely hard to find. Good nurses are even harder to find. It is not in the interest of an employer to ever look for reasons to terminate anybody. Having said that, every employer wants to hold employees accountable, because if you don't hold one employee accountable for a violation of a work rule, then you can't apply it selectively. You have to apply it uniformly. So that's where the issues really arise. That an employee doesn't want to be held accountable for his or her behaviors and wants to disagree. And that's why we get to grievances, that's why we, unfortunately, sadly, sometimes nurses lose their job.
Thank you so much. That's very enlightening.
You are welcome. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.